What was there of terror in the idea of killing her? He looked up at me, and evidently saw the change in my face, for he said, almost joyously, "Ah, you believe now." I answered, "Do not press me too hard all at once." It made me shudder to think of so mutilating the body of the woman whom I had loved. And yet the feeling was not so strong as I had expected. I was, in fact, beginning to shudder at the thought of this being, this undead, as Van Helsing called it, and to loathe it. Finally, the professor said quietly, "My mind is made up. Let us go. You return home for tonight to your asylum and see that all be well. Tomorrow night you will come to me at 10 of the clock. 24th of September. At just 12:15 midnight, we got into the room where Lucy had been laid out in her coffin by the undertaker I had engaged that morning. The professor took from his bag a lantern, which he lit. When he lifted the lid off Lucy's coffin, I looked and saw that the body lay there in all its death beauty. Presently I said to Van Helsing, "Is this really Lucy's body, or only a demon in her shape?" "It is her body, and yet not it. But wait a while, and you shall see her as she was, and is." She seemed like a nightmare of Lucy as she lay there. The pointed teeth, the voluptuous mouth, which it made one shudder to see. Van Helsing, in his methodical manner, began taking the various contents from his bag and placing them ready for use. First he took out his operating knives, and then a round wooden stake, some 2½ or 3 inches thick, and about 3 feet long. One end of it was sharpened to a fine point. With this stake came a heavy hammer. When all was ready, Van Helsing said, "Before we do anything, let me tell you this. The undead cannot die, and all that die from the preying of the undead become themselves undead, and prey on their kind. Friend John, if you had met that kiss yesterday before poor Lucy died, you would, in time, have become Nosferatu, as they call it in Eastern Europe, or undead. So, my friend, it will be a blessed hand for her that shall strike the blow that sets her free. To this I am willing. But do not you, who loved her, have a better right?" "Go on," I said. "Tell me what I am to do." "Take this stake in your left hand, ready to place the point over the heart, and the hammer in your right. Then, when I begin the prayer for the dead, strike in God's name, that all may be well with the dead that we love, and that the undead pass away." As I took the stake and the hammer, Van Helsing opened his missal and began to read. I placed the point over the heart, and as I looked, I could see its dint in the white flesh. Then I struck with all my might. The thing in the coffin writhed, and a hideous blood-curdling screech came from the opened red lips. The body shook and quivered and twisted in wild contortions. The sharp white teeth champed together till the lips were cut and the mouth was smeared with a crimson foam, whilst the blood from the pierced heart welled and spurted up. And then the writhing and the quivering of the body became less, and the teeth ceased to champ and the face to quiver. Finally, it lay still. The terrible task was over. There in the coffin lay Lucy as we had seen her in her life, with her face of unequaled sweetness and purity. We felt the holy calm that lay like sunshine over the wasted face. The professor and I sawed the top off the stake, leaving the point of it in the body. Then we cut off the head and filled the mouth with garlic. We screwed on the coffin lid, and gathering up our belongings, came away. Outside the air was sweet, the sun shone and the birds sang. And it seemed as if all nature were tuned to a different pitch. Before we moved away, Van Helsing said, "Now, my friend, there remains a greater task, to find out the author of all this our sorrow, and to stamp him out." Mina Harker's journal, the 22nd of September. It seems only yesterday that the last entry was made, and yet how much between them. In Whitby, and all the world before me, Jonathan away and no news of him, and now married to Jonathan, Jonathan a solicitor, master of his own business. We spent yesterday in town, taking a bus to Hyde Park Corner, and walked down Piccadilly. Jonathan was holding me by the arm, the way he used to in the old days. When I felt him clutch my arm so tight that he hurt me, and he said under his breath, "My God!" He was very pale, and his eyes seemed bulging out as, half in terror and half in amazement, he gazed at a tall, thin man with a beaky nose and black moustache and pointed beard, who was observing a pretty girl. His face was not a good face. It was hard and cruel and sensual, and his big white teeth, that looked all the whiter because his lips were so red, were pointed like an animal's. Jonathan kept staring at him, till I was afraid the man would notice. I feared he might take it ill. He looked so fierce and nasty. I asked Jonathan why he was disturbed, and he answered, "It is the man himself." The poor dear was evidently terrified at something. The dark man hailed a hansom. Jonathan kept looking after him, and said, as if to himself, "I believe it is the Count. But he has grown young. My God, if this be so. I must not ask him, for fear I shall do more harm than good, but I must somehow learn the facts of his journey abroad. I shall take his foreign journal and lock myself up in my room and read it." 24th of September. I hadn't the heart to write last night. That terrible record of Jonathan's upset me so. Poor dear, how he must have suffered, whether it be true or only imagination. I wonder if there is any truth in it at all. There seems to be through it all some thread of continuity. That fearful Count was coming to London. Letter. Van Helsing to Mrs. Harker, 24th of September. Dear Madam, I pray you to pardon my writing, in that I am so far friend as that I send to you sad news of Miss Lucy Westenra's death. I find some letters from you which show how great friends you were and how you love her. Oh, Madam Mina, I implore you help me. It is for others' good that I ask, to redress great wrong, and to lift much and terrible troubles. May it be that I see you. You can trust me. I am friend of Dr. John Seward. Again, your pardon, and forgive me. Van Helsing. Mina Harker's journal, 25th of September. I cannot help feeling terribly excited as the time draws near for the visit of Dr. Van Helsing, for somehow I expect it will throw some light upon Jonathan's sad experience, and as he attended poor dear Lucy in her last illness, he can tell me all about her. It is 2:00, and the doctor will be here soon now. I shall say nothing of Jonathan's journal unless he asks me. If he asks about Lucy, I shall give him my own. Later. He has come and gone. Oh, what a strange meeting, and how it all makes my head whirl round. If I had not read Jonathan's journal first, I should never have accepted even a possibility. He at once began, "Forgive me, but I had to begin to inquire somewhere, and there was none to ask. I know that you were with Lucy at Whitby. In great perplexity, then, I come to you, and ask you out of your so much kindness to tell me all that you remember. I can tell you, I think, Dr. Van Helsing, all about it. I wrote it all down at the time. I took the copy from my work-basket and handed it to him, then left him to read. When I came back, I found him walking hurriedly up and down the room, his face all ablaze with excitement. He rushed up to me and took me by both hands. "Madam," he said this very solemnly, "if ever Abraham Van Helsing can do anything for you or yours, I trust you will let me know. I have read your diary that you have so goodly given to me, and which breathes out truth in every line. Your husband is noble nature, and you are noble too, for you trust, and trust cannot be where there is mean nature. And your husband? Tell me of him. Is he quite well? I saw here an opening to ask him about Jonathan, so I said, he was almost recovered, but when we were in town on Thursday last, he had a sort of shock. What kind of shock was it? He thought he saw someone who recalled something terrible. If you will let me, I shall give you a paper to read. It is the copy of his journal when abroad, and all that happened. Perhaps you will be very kind and tell me what you think. I promise, he said, as I gave him the papers. I shall in the morning, so soon as I can, come to see you and your husband, if I may. So he took the papers with him and went away, and I sit here thinking, I don't know what. Letter by hand. Van Helsing to Mrs. Harker, 25th of September, 6 o'clock. Dear Madam Mina, I have read your husband's so wonderful diary. You may sleep without doubt. Strange and terrible as it is true. I will pledge my life on it. I am blessed that today I come to see you. Yours, the most faithful, Abraham Van Helsing. Jonathan Harker's journal, the 26th of September. I thought never to write in this diary again, but the time has come. When I got home last night, Mina told me of Van Helsing's visit, and of her having given him the 2 diaries. She showed me in the doctor's letter that all I wrote down was true. It seems to have made a new man of me. Now that I know, I am not afraid, even of the Count. He has succeeded after all, then, in his design in getting to London, and it was he that I saw. He has got younger. And how? Van Helsing is the man to unmask him and hunt him out, if he is anything like what Mina says. Dr. Seward's diary, 29th September. Last night the professor introduced me to dear Lucy's friend Mina Harker, Mina Murray that was, and her husband. How strange that they too should be connected with this trouble. By the end of the evening, each of us knew the other's story. It unnerved me to discover that the Count's estate was the building next to my asylum. If only the professor and I had known earlier, we might have saved poor Lucy. But let me not think on that. The Harkers and the professor are staying here at the asylum with me. Now we are all informed as to the facts, we can arrange our plan of battle with this terrible and mysterious enemy. We are to meet in my study later this evening. Mina Harker's journal, 30th of September. When we met in Dr. Seward's study 2 hours after dinner, Professor Van Helsing took the head of the table and said, "It is good that I tell you something of the kind of enemy with which we have to deal. This vampire which is amongst us is of himself so strong in person as 20 men. He is of cunning more than mortal, for his cunning be the growth of ages. He can, within limitations, appear at will in many shapes and forms. He can, within his range, direct the elements, the storm, the fog, the thunder. He can command all the meaner things, the bat, the fox, and the wolf, and he can at times vanish and come unknown. How then are we to destroy him? My friends, it is a terrible task that we undertake, and there may be consequences to make the brave shudder. For if we fail in this our fight, he must surely win, and then where end we? To fail here is not mere life or death, it is that we become as him, that we henceforward become foul things of the night, like him, without heart or conscience, preying on the bodies and the souls of those we love best." The professor stood up, and after laying his silver crucifix on the table, held out his hand on either side, so as we all took hands our solemn compact was made. Dr. Van Helsing went on, "Well, you know what we have to contend against, but we too are not without strength. The hours of the day and the night are ours equally. We have an end to achieve, which is not a selfish one. These things are much. He cannot go where he lists. He who is not of nature has yet to obey some of nature's laws. Why? We know not. His power ceases, as does that of all evil things at the coming of the day. It is said, too, that he can only pass running water at the slack or the flood of the tide. Then there are things which so afflict him that he has no power, garlic, and the things sacred, as my crucifix. Thus, when we find the habitation of this man that was, we can confine him to his coffin and destroy him, if we obey what we know. There was a little pause, and then the professor went on. And now we must settle what we do. We know from the inquiry of Jonathan that from the castle to Whitby came 50 boxes of earth, all of which were delivered at Carfax. It seems to me that our first step should be to ascertain whether all remain in the house beyond that wall. We must sterilize the earth, so that no more can he seek safety in it. Thus, in the end, we may find him in his form of man between the hours of noon and sunset, and so engage with him when he is at his most weak. We men are determined, nay, are we not pledged, to destroy this monster? But it is no part for a woman. For you, Madam Mina, this night is the end until all be well. You are too precious to us to have such risk. When we part tonight, you no more must question. We shall tell you all in good time. All the men, even Jonathan, seemed relieved, and though it was a bitter pill for me to swallow, I could say nothing, save to accept their chivalrous care of me. They have now gone off to Carfax, with means to get into the house. Jonathan Harker's journal. 1st of October, 5 a.m. I went with the party to search with an easy mind, for I think I never saw Mina so absolutely strong and well. I am so glad that she consented to hold back and let us do the work. We took our way to the house, taking care to keep in the shadows of the trees. When we got to the porch, the professor opened the door with a skeleton key. He turned to me and said, "You know this place, Jonathan. You have copied maps of it. Which is the way to the chapel?" I had an idea of its direction, so I led the way. With a little trouble, we opened the door. We were prepared for some unpleasantness, for as we were opening the door, a faint, malodorous air seemed to exhale through the gaps. But none of us ever expected such an odor as we encountered. How shall I describe it? It was not alone that it was composed of all the ills of mortality, and with the pungent, acrid smell of blood, but it seemed as though corruption had itself become corrupt. Every breath exhaled by that monster seemed to have clung to the place and intensified its loathsomeness. We made an accurate examination of the place, the professor saying as we began, "The first thing is to see how many of the boxes are here." We discovered that there were only 49 left out of the 50. We were soon at work, sterilizing the 49. In each box we placed pieces of the host, communion bread, and sealed the lid down hard. Van Helsing's nerves must be of steel, for he never wavered, and gave constant encouragement to Seward and me. As we sealed the lid on the last box, the professor said, "We know that there remains one box to the Count. While he has that, he has still a refuge. We must return here in the light of day and make our search all over the house. We must find the 50th. The morning was quickening in the east when we emerged from the front. Dr. Van Helsing locked the door, putting the key into his pocket when he had done. "So far," he said, "our night has been eminently successful. No harm has come to us such as I feared might be, and yet our first step has been accomplished. It may be ordained that we have many nights and days to follow, if full of peril, but we must go on, and from no danger shall we shrink." The house was silent when we got back, save for some poor creature who was screaming away in one of the distant wards. I came tiptoe into our own room. What I saw appalled me. I felt my hair rise like bristles on the back of my neck, and my heart seemed to stand still, till I could hear my own voice screaming. Kneeling on the near edge of the bed, facing outwards, was the white-clad figure of my wife. By her side stood a tall, thin man, clad in black. His face was turned from me, but the instant I saw him, I recognized the Count. With his left hand he held both Mina's hands. His right hand gripped her by the back of the neck, forcing her face down on his bosom. Her white nightdress was smeared with blood, and a thin stream trickled down the man's bare breast, which was shown by his torn-open dress. The attitude of the two had a terrible resemblance to a child forcing a kitten's nose into a saucer of milk to compel it to drink. The Count turned his face. His eyes, flamed red with devilish passion, the white, sharp teeth behind the full lips of the blood-dripping mouth champed together like those of a wild beast. He turned and sprang at me. But by this time the professor had appeared and was holding towards him his silver crucifix. The Count stopped suddenly and cowered back. The light in the room failed as a great black cloud sailed across the sky, and when it returned we saw nothing but a faint vapor which trailed under the door. Van Helsing and I moved forward to Mina, who by this time had drawn her breath, and with it had given a scream so wild that it seems to me now that it will ring in my ears till my dying day. Then she put before her face her poor crushed hands, which bore on their whiteness the red mark of the Count's terrible grip, and sobbed in a way that was heart-breaking to hear. Van Helsing gave Mina a sedative. It is now almost dawn as I write. Of this I am sure. The sun rises today on no more miserable house in all the great round of its daily course. 3rd of October. As I must do something or go mad, I write this diary. It is now 6 o'clock, and we are to meet in the study in half an hour and take something to eat, for Dr. Van Helsing and Dr. Seward are agreed that if we do not eat, we cannot work our best. Breakfast was a strange meal to us all. We tried to be cheerful and encourage each other, and Mina was the brightest and most cheerful of us. When it was over, Van Helsing stood up and said, "Now, my dear friends, we go forth to our terrible enterprise. Are we all armed against ghostly as well as carnal attack?" We all assured him. "Then it is well. Now, Madam Mina, you are in any case quite safe here until the sunset, and before then we shall return. Now let me guard yourself. On your forehead I touch this piece of sacred wafer in the name of the Father, the Son, and of—" There was a fearful scream which almost froze our hearts to hear. As he placed the wafer on Mina's forehead, it had burned into the flesh as though it had been a piece of white-hot metal. She sank on her knees on the floor in an agony of abasement. Pulling her beautiful hair over her face as the leper of old his mantle, she wailed out, "Unclean! Unclean! Even the Almighty shuns my polluted flesh. I must bear this mark of shame upon my forehead until the judgment day." I had thrown myself beside her in an agony of helpless grief, and putting my arms around her, held her tight. Then, without a word, we all knelt down together, and, all holding hands, swore to be true to each other. We men pledged ourselves to raise the veil of sorrow from the head of her, whom, each in his own way, we loved, and we prayed for help and guidance in the terrible task which lay before us. We entered Carfax without trouble, and found all things the same as on the first occasion. Had there not been terrible memories to spur us on, we could hardly have proceeded with our task. We moved to explore the house, all keeping together in case of attack, for we knew we had a strong and wily enemy to deal with, and as yet we did not know whether the Count might not be in the house. Suddenly the Professor held up a warning hand, and we all could hear a key softly inserted in the lock of the hall door. We waited in a suspense that made the seconds pass with nightmare slowness. The slow, careful steps came along the hall. The Count was evidently prepared for some surprise. At least he feared it. Suddenly, with a single bound, he leapt into the room, winning away past us before any of us could raise a hand to stay him. As the Count saw us, a horrible sort of snarl passed over his face, showing the eye teeth long and pointed. We all advanced upon him. It was a pity that we had not some better organized plan of attack, for even at the moment I wondered what we were to do. Instinctively I moved forward with the crucifix and wafer in my hand. I felt a mighty power fly along my arm, and I saw the monster cower back before a similar movement made spontaneously by each one of us. It would be impossible to describe the expression of hate and baffled malignity which came over the Count's face. The next instant, with a sinuous dive, he dashed across the room and threw himself at the window. Amid the crash and glitter of the falling glass, he tumbled into the flagged area below. We ran over and saw him spring unhurt from the ground. There he turned and spoke to us. "You think to baffle me? You, with your pale faces all in a row, like sheep in a butcher's? You shall be sorry yet, each one of you. You think you have left me without a place to rest. But I have more. It was now late in the afternoon, and sunset was not far off. We had to recognize that our game was up. With heavy hearts, we agreed with the professor when he said, "Let us go back to Madam Mina. Poor, poor dear Madam Mina. All we can do just now is done. We have learned something, much. Notwithstanding his brave words, he fears us. He fear time. He fear want. For if not, why he hurry so? His very tone betray him, or my ears deceive. There is but one more earth box, and we must try to find it. When that is done, all may yet be well." 4th of October, morning. During the night I was awakened by Mina. The grey of the coming dawn was making the windows into sharp oblongs. She said to me hurriedly, "Go call the professor. I want to see him at once." "Why?" I asked. "I have an idea. Go quick, dearest. The time is getting close." 2 or 3 minutes later, Van Helsing was in the room in his dressing gown, with Dr. Seward at the door. "I want you to hypnotize me," she said. "Do it before the dawn, for I can feel as he does, and speak as he would. Be quick, for the time is short." Without a word, Van Helsing motioned her to sit up in bed. Mina gazed at him fixedly for a few minutes, during which my own heart beat like a trip hammer. Gradually her eyes closed, and she sat stock still. The stillness was broken by Van Helsing's voice, speaking in a low, level tone. "What do you see?" he asked her. "I can see nothing. It is all dark," replied Mina. "What do you hear?" "The lapping of water on the outside." "Then you are on a ship?" The answer came quick. "Oh, yes." "Where are you going?" "Home. I am still. Oh, so still. It is like death." The voice faded away into a deep breath, as of one sleeping. By this time the sun had risen, and we were all in the full light of day. Mina awoke and seemed to know the situation without telling. The professor's calm voice spoke. "We can know now what was in the Count's mind. He meant escape. He saw that with but one earth box left, and a pack of men following like dogs after a fox, this London was no place for him. He have taken his last earth box on board a ship, and he leave the land. He think to escape, but no, we follow him. He, our enemy, have gone away. He have gone back to his castle in Transylvania. He find ship going by the same route he came, and he go in it. The ship by now is well out to sea." After a general discussion, it was determined that for tonight nothing be definitely settled, that we should all sleep on the facts, and try to think out the proper conclusions. Tomorrow at breakfast we are to meet again, and after making our conclusions known to one another, we shall decide on some course of action. Dr. Seward's diary. 5th of October. We all rose early, and I think that sleep did much for each and all of us. When we met at early breakfast, there was more general cheerfulness than any of us had ever expected to experience again. We are to meet here in my study in half an hour and decide on our course of action. I see only one immediate difficulty. I know it by instinct rather than reason. We shall all have to speak frankly, and yet I fear that in some mysterious way poor Mrs. Harker's tongue is tied. I suppose it is some of that horrid poison which has got into her veins beginning to work. Van Helsing is coming to my study a little before the others. I shall try and open the subject with him. Later, when the professor came in, he said suddenly, "Madam Mina, our poor dear Madam Mina is changing." A cold shiver ran through me to find my worst fears thus endorsed. Van Helsing continued, "If it be that she can by our hypnotic trance tell what the Count see and hear, is it not more true that he who have hypnotized her first should, if he will, compel her mind to disclose to him that which she know?" I nodded acquiescence. He went on, Then what we must do is to prevent this. We must keep her ignorant of our intent, and so she cannot tell what she know not. Later, at the very outset of our meeting, Mrs. Harker had sent a message by her husband to say that she would not join us at present. The professor explained our decision to Harker, and somehow he seemed relieved. Van Helsing roughly put the facts before us. Today I went to the port authority. They tell me there is only one ship bound for Varna. That ship left the Thames yesterday morning. It will take her at least 3 weeks to reach Varna. We can travel overland to the same place in 3 days. We shall at any rate be in Varna before the ship arrives, and be able to make such preparations as may be necessary. Of course, we shall all go armed against evil things, spiritual as well as physical. Madam Mina shall come with us, but she must not know the details of our plans. Tonight and tomorrow we can get ready, and then, if all be well, we four can set out on our journey. There must be no chance lost, and in Varna we must be ready to act the instant when the ship arrives. What shall we do exactly? I asked. The professor paused before replying. We shall at the first board that ship. Then, when we have identified the box, we shall place a branch of the wild rose on it, for when it is there, none can emerge. Then, when we get the opportunity that we seek, when none are near to see, we shall open the box, and all will be well. Jonathan Harker's Journal, 15th of October, Varna. We left Charing Cross on the morning of the 12th, got to Paris the same night, and took the places secured for us in the Orient Express. We travelled night and day, arriving here at about 5 o'clock. 17th of October. Everything is pretty well fixed now, I think, to welcome the Count on his return from his tour. There is only one ship expected here from England. Seawood told the shippers that he fancied that the box on board might contain something stolen from a friend of his, and got consent that he might open it, at his own risk. If the Count is there, Van Helsing and Seawood will cut off his head at once and drive a stake through his heart. The professor says that if we can so treat the Count's body, it will soon after fall into dust, so there will be no evidence against us in case any suspicion of murder were aroused. All we can do now is to wait. 27th of October. Most strange. No news yet of the ship we wait for, and she is several days late. 28th of October. None of us could have expected the news we had today. Our waiting and planning have been in vain. The port authorities here have told us that the ship has arrived at the next port of Galatz. When he heard this, Van Helsing raised his hands over his head for a moment, as though in remonstrance with the Almighty, but in a few seconds he stood up with his face sternly set and said, "My surmise is this, that in London the Count decided to get back to his castle by water as the most safe way. He was brought from the castle by Zigany, and they delivered their cargo to Varna, and there it was shipped for London. Thus the Count had knowledge of the persons who could arrange this service. Now, when the box was landed at Galatz, before sunrise or after sunset, he comes out from his box and makes arrangements to be returned to the castle in the same way. He is clever, our foe. But we follow, even if it mean we go to hell itself." Jonathan Harker's journal continued, written in the carriage. The 1st of November. All day long we have travelled, and at a good speed. Dr. Van Helsing is laconic. He tells the farmers that he is hurrying to Bistritz and pays them well to make the exchange of horses. We get hot soup, or coffee, or tea, and off we go. In the first house where we stopped, when the woman who served us saw the scar on Mina's brow, she crossed herself and put out 2 fingers towards her to keep off the evil eye. Ever since then, she takes care not to take off her hat or veil, and so has escaped their suspicions. We are travelling fast, and the professor seems tireless. 2nd November, night. All day long driving. Dr. Van Helsing says that by morning we shall reach the Borgo Pass. We do not want to arrive before, so we take it easy, and have each a long rest in turn. 4th of November. Borgo Pass. It is morning, and I write by a fire which all the night we have kept alive. It is cold, so cold that the grey, heavy sky is full of snow. Last night, Mina prepared our food while we saw to the horses, and set them tethered in shelter to feed. When we returned, she served us our meal without taking any food for herself. She simply smiled and said that she had eaten while we were away, that she was so hungry that she could not wait. I like it not, and I am afraid, even to think. The stake we play for is life and death, or more than these, and we must not flinch. My dear Mina's life is in the balance. We surely have not much time left to act, and the castle is still half a day's drive from this pass. We must find the Count in his lair before sunset today, and destroy him there. If we fail, we are lost, and Mina will become like him, undead for all time. 5th of November. It is over. I scarcely have the will to write, but I must record our story, even to the very end. It was late afternoon when we approached the castle, and the shadows were already growing long. How strange our little band must have looked. 3 men, 1 woman, armed with nothing but 1 hammer and stake, a crucifix each, and our trust in God and our own resolve. For the hammer we found an early use. Though the doors were all open, we broke all their rusty hinges, lest some ill chance should close them once we were inside. By memory I led the way to the chapel. The air was oppressive. It seemed as if there were some sulphurous fume, which at times made Mina dizzy. Afar, we heard the low howl of wolves. As we approached the place, we each felt the yearning for sleep and delay, which seemed to call us. We braced ourselves for our horrid task, and entered the chapel. The air was rank and fetid inside. Through a high window the last low rays of the sun began to glow red. There was almost no time left to us. We looked quickly around the room and saw many tombs, of all the tribe of vampires, no doubt. There was one great tomb, more lordly than all the rest. It was huge and nobly proportioned. On it was but one word: Dracula. This, then, was the undead home of the King Vampire. Carefully, silently, as if we dared not wake the dead, Seward and I put our shoulders to the lid of the tomb and slid it to one side. There within lay the Count. He was deathly pale, just like a waxen image, but the red eyes gleamed with the horrible vindictive look which I first saw so many months ago. As I looked, the eyes saw the sinking sun, and the look of hate in them turned to triumph, but on the instant came the sweep of Van Helsing's hand driving the stake deep into the vampire's heart. Mina shrieked and clung to me as we saw the blood surge and well. It was like a miracle. But before our very eyes, and almost in the drawing of a breath, the whole body crumbled into dust and passed from our sight. I shall be glad, as long as I live, that even in that moment of final dissolution, there was in the face a look of peace, such as I never could have imagined.